The winter of 1887 hit the mountain village of Wilderidge like a living thing, cold, silent, and unforgiving. Snow piled against the stone cottages, and the wind howled through the narrow streets as if warning the villagers to stay inside. But tonight, the whole village was gathered in the square, not for warmth, but for punishment. 17-year-old Millie Craft stood barefoot on the frozen ground, her wrists bound with coarse rope. The mayor's wife had accused her of stealing a silver brooch and casting a curse over the village. No proof was offered, none was needed. Millie was an orphan, and orphans were always the easiest targets. The elder raised his hand and spoke the sentence that would decide her fate. "Leave her at the high pass. If she survives, she is innocent. If she dies, the mountain has spoken." And far above the village, hidden in the storm-lashed peaks, a faint lantern light flickered, like a signal from someone who had been waiting for this moment. At dawn, the guards dragged Millie toward the high pass, the narrow trail carved into the mountain like a scar. Her thin shawl barely protected her from the cold. The villagers watched from below, their faces hard with satisfaction, as if they were finally free of the curse they believed she carried. The wind screamed through the rocks, pushing snow into Millie's face. Her legs shook, not only from cold, but from the shock of betrayal, because the person who had accused her wasn't just any villager. It was her own aunt, Leora, who had raised her after her parents disappeared. Leora's eyes held a strange satisfaction, as if Millie's fall was the final proof of her power. Millie tried to call out, but her voice vanished into the storm. When the guards reached the high pass marker, they untied her hands and pushed her forward, leaving her alone with the mountain. Millie stood there for a moment, staring into the white abyss, then walked on, because she had learned long ago that fear only wins if you... Millie's life had always been a cage, but she only realized the bars were real the night she found the hidden drawer. In the attic of her family's stone house, she had been searching for old cloth when she noticed the loose plank beneath the floorboards. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon, and a small ring stained with dark old blood. Her hands trembled as she read her father's handwriting, each word heavier than the last. The letters spoke of a fire, an accident that killed her mother, and of a stranger blamed for it. But the truth was written clearly in the last letter. Her father had started the blaze to hide a secret, and her mother had tried to stop him. The ring belonged to the woman who took the blame, a woman Millie had seen only once, years ago when she was a child. The moment Millie understood the betrayal, something inside her snapped. She realized her father had never loved her, he had only protected his reputation. The villagers' hatred, the cold shoulders, the cruel whispers, all of it was part of a plan. Millie's heart pounded as she closed the drawer, the truth burning behind her eyes. She knew she had to leave, but the mountain path was dangerous, and the valley had eyes everywhere. As she stepped back toward the attic door, the sound of footsteps echoed below. Someone was coming. Millie froze as the footsteps grew louder. Her heart hammered in her chest, and for a moment she wished she could disappear into the shadows. She quickly shoved the letters and ring back into the hidden drawer and tried to act normal, but the floorboards creaked under her feet. The attic door opened slowly, and her Aunt Leora appeared, her face pale from the cold, but her eyes sharp like a knife. Leora's gaze fell on Millie's trembling hands, and a cold smile formed on her lips. "You shouldn't be up here," she said softly, as if speaking to a child. Millie forced her voice to stay steady. "I was just looking for the old cloth." Leora stepped closer, her boots leaving wet marks on the wooden floor. "You always were curious," she whispered, "too curious for your own good." Millie felt anger rise, but she kept it hidden. She knew better than to show weakness. Leora reached out and grabbed Millie's wrist, squeezing it hard enough to leave bruises. "You know why the village hates you," she said. "They hate your mother. They hate her magic." Millie pulled away, her eyes burning. "It's not magic," she snapped. "It's medicine." Leora's smile faded, her voice turned colder. "Medicine that killed my husband," she said. "Medicine that cursed this village." Millie's breath stopped. She realized the betrayal ran deeper than she thought. Leora wasn't just jealous, she was the one who had fed the village's lies. And now, in the attic, Millie understood that her life had never been hers. It had been controlled by a woman who feared the truth. Leora's face hardened as she saw Millie's defiance. "You still don't understand," she said quietly. "Your mother wasn't a healer, she was a witch, and you inherited her power." Millie's stomach tightened. She had never believed in magic, but the village's fear had always been real. Leora stepped closer, her voice lowering into a threatening whisper. "The village will never accept you. If they see you alive again, they will burn you." Millie's hands clenched. She realized the truth now. Leora had not only betrayed her family, she had used Millie as a tool to keep control over the village. If Millie disappeared, the villagers would never know the real story. They would continue to blame her mother and fear her name. Leora pulled out a small key from her pocket and tossed it toward Millie. "This opens the old chest," she said. "Your mother kept something there. Take it and disappear. If you stay, you will bring destruction." Millie caught the key with shaking fingers. Her heart raced. She didn't know what was inside the chest, but she knew one thing for certain. The moment she left the village, her life would change forever. Before Millie could ask another question, Leora turned and walked away, leaving the attic door open like a warning. Millie stood alone in the dim room, the wind howling outside. She looked at the key in her hand, and she understood the choice before her: run and survive, or stay and fight for the truth. Millie stayed frozen for a moment, staring at the key as if it were a small, burning coin. The attic felt smaller now, as if the walls were closing in. She remembered her mother's soft voice and the way she used to hum while working with herbs. Never loud, never proud, just calm and kind. Millie had always thought her mother was innocent, but now everything felt like a trap. She carefully stepped down the attic stairs, holding the key tightly. The village was silent, but the silence felt dangerous, like the air itself was listening. As she reached the hallway, she noticed the door to the chest room slightly open. A faint smell of old herbs and metal drifted out. Millie hesitated, then walked toward it, her heart beating fast. Inside the chest room, dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. Millie found the old wooden chest in the corner, covered with cobwebs. The key fit perfectly into the lock. When she opened it, she saw a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon and a small velvet pouch filled with dried herbs. Her hands trembled as she lifted the letters. The top one was addressed to her in her mother's handwriting. The last line made her blood run cold. "If they ever come for you, trust the one who lives beyond the mountain." Millie felt the room spin. She realized the village had lied to her all along. Someone had been protecting her, and now she had to find them before the village found her. Millie ran outside into the cold night, the letters pressed against her chest like a shield. The snow crunched under her boots as she rushed toward the edge of the village. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to leave before anyone noticed. The wind slammed against her face, but she kept moving, driven by a sudden courage she had never felt before. As she reached the old mountain path, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, expecting the guards. But instead, she saw a tall man standing in the shadows, a stranger with a strong build and a face that looked both tired and dangerous. His dark hair was messy from the wind, and his eyes were sharp like a hunter's. He looked like he belonged to the mountains, not to any village. He stepped forward slowly, as if he didn't want to scare her. "Millie," he said quietly, his voice calm and deep. "Your mother sent you this." Millie's heart stopped. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man lifted his hand, showing a small charm that matched the one in her mother's letters. "I am called Carl, and I've been—" Carl stepped closer, his boots sinking into the fresh snow. Millie's breath formed little clouds in the cold air, and she felt her hands shaking as she held the letters tighter. She wanted to run, but something in his voice stopped her, an unspoken promise of safety. "I know what they did to you," Carl said softly, his eyes scanning the village behind her as if he could see every secret. "I know why you're running." Millie's throat tightened. She didn't want to believe him, but the fear inside her was too strong. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice trembling. Carl looked at the letters in her hand. "Because your mother was my friend," he said, "and she trusted me to protect you if the village ever turned against you." Millie's heart pounded. She remembered the stories about the mountain man, how he was dangerous, how he lived alone in the cold. But Carl didn't feel like a monster. He felt like the only person who understood her. "I'm not here to hurt you," Carl continued. "I'm here to take you somewhere safe, somewhere the village can't reach." Millie stared at him, uncertain and scared, but something in her chest began to loosen. The mountain path ahead was dark and unknown, yet it felt like the only road left for her. Carl extended his hand. "Come with me," he said, and his voice carried a calm strength. "I will protect you." Millie hesitated for a moment, then slowly placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his grip. In that instant, she realized she was no longer alone. Millie took a deep breath and followed Carl into the dark path. The village lights faded behind them, swallowed by the thick snow and the mountain silence. Each step was heavy, and the cold seemed to get sharper with every mile. Millie's mind raced with questions. Why did her mother trust this man? And why did the village fear him so much? Carl walked steadily, as if the mountain was a part of him. He moved with the confidence of someone who had survived years alone in the wild. Millie noticed the way his boots sank into the snow, the way he listened to the wind, and the way his eyes always seemed to be searching for danger. He didn't speak much, but his silence felt like protection rather than distance. After an hour of walking, Carl stopped beside a large pine tree hidden behind a rock outcrop. "We need to rest," he said. "The storm will get worse." He pulled out a small pack and handed Millie a thick wool blanket and a piece of dried bread. Millie accepted them, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and fear. As she wrapped herself in the blanket, she saw something on Carl's hand, a faded scar shaped like a crescent moon. It looked old, as if it had been burned long ago. Millie's eyes widened. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. Carl looked away, his face darkening for a moment. "It's a long story, one you will learn someday." Then he added, softer, "For now, rest. You need strength." Millie nodded, but her mind kept turning. She realized that Carl wasn't just a mountain man. He was someone with his own past, his own pain. And now, for the first time, Millie understood that her journey was not only about escaping the village, it was also about discovering the truth. The next morning, the storm had turned into a quiet snowfall, and the mountain air felt sharper and cleaner than anything Millie had ever breathed. Carl woke early and guided her to a hidden cave entrance, camouflaged behind a wall of snow-covered branches. Inside, the cave was warm and dry, protected from the wind. A small fire crackled in the center, and the smell of dried herbs filled the air. Millie's body relaxed for the first time in days. Carl gave her a bowl of hot soup made from roots and wild herbs. The warmth spread through her like a gentle wave. She ate slowly, watching him carefully. His hands were strong, but his movements were careful, like someone who had learned to survive by being patient and precise. After she finished, Carl finally spoke. "You're safe here," he said, "but the village will not stop until they find you. Your Aunt Leora will lead them." Millie's heart sank. "Why does she hate me?" she asked, voice trembling. Carl stared into the fire for a moment before answering. "Because she wanted your mother's power," he said quietly, "and because she feared what your mother represented. The village was never meant to be free of you. It was meant to be controlled." Millie felt a cold rage rise inside her. She had always thought her aunt was the only family she had. Now she understood the truth. Leora had betrayed her for power and control, and the village had followed her like sheep. Millie's hands clenched, but she kept her voice calm. "Then I will not go back," she said, "not ever." Carl nodded slowly. "Good," he replied, "because the mountain has its own laws, and you will learn them." That night, the cave felt strangely peaceful. The fire crackled softly, and the snow outside made a quiet rhythm against the rocks. Millie lay on a bed of furs, her mind still spinning with the truth about her aunt. She kept thinking about the letters, the hidden ring, and the fact that her mother had trusted Carl. Carl sat near the entrance, watching the dark forest with careful eyes. He seemed distant, as if he was carrying a burden too heavy to speak about. Millie couldn't sleep, so she finally spoke. "Carl, why did my mother trust you?" Carl's expression softened for a moment. He looked at her with a mix of sadness and respect. "Because she knew the village would betray her," he said, "and because she believed in something that no one else did. Love." Millie blinked, surprised by the word. "Love?" she repeated. Carl nodded. "Your mother loved you more than her own fear, and she loved me for helping her when she needed it most." He paused, then added quietly, "I once loved someone too, and I lost her because of the village." Millie felt her heart tighten. She realized Carl's silence was not just from mystery, it was from pain. She looked at him, and for the first time, she felt something warm inside her chest, like a spark. It scared her, because she didn't know if she could trust her feelings. Carl stood up and walked toward her, but he kept his distance. "Rest now. Tomorrow we leave for the ridge. You will learn to survive, and I will teach you how to protect yourself." Millie nodded, but her mind kept turning. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. Carl was not just her protector, he was becoming her reason to stay. The next morning, Carl led Millie to a hidden ridge high above the village, where the wind was sharp and the sky seemed endless. The mountain was wild and empty, but Carl moved through it like it was his home. He showed her how to read the snow, how to follow tracks, how to find shelter, and how to tell when the ice beneath her feet was dangerous. Millie listened carefully, her fear slowly turning into strength. As they walked, Millie noticed the way Carl watched her, not like a guard watching a prisoner, but like someone watching a person he cared about. She felt something shift inside her, like the cold was melting just a little. When they reached a small plateau, Carl stopped and pointed to a distant valley below. "That is where the village is," he said. "They will keep searching, but they will never find this place." Millie looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, her voice soft. Carl's face grew serious. "Because your mother saved my sister," he said quietly. "She was sick, and your mother healed her when no one else would. I owe her everything." Millie's eyes widened. She didn't know Carl had a sister. The truth hit her hard. Carl was not only connected to her mother, he was connected to her family's past in a way she never imagined. Carl then added, his voice lower, "And because I see you, I see the same strength in you that I saw in her." Millie felt her cheeks warm, and for a moment she looked away. The wind was cold, but her heart felt strange, like it was being pulled toward him. Days turned into weeks, and Millie grew stronger with each lesson. She learned to hunt with a bow, to track animals, and to build shelters from snow and branches. She also learned something else: how to keep her heart calm in the face of fear. Carl was patient, strict, and surprisingly gentle when she needed it. One evening, after a long day of training, Millie sat beside the fire while Carl cleaned his hunting knife. The sky above them turned a deep purple, and the mountain was quiet except for the crackle of the flames. Millie looked at Carl and felt a strange warmth in her chest that she could no longer ignore. "Carl," she said softly, "do you ever miss the village?" Carl's eyes paused for a moment. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy. "I miss the part of it that was kind," he said. "But the village became a place of lies and fear. That is why I left." Millie's heart beat faster. She wanted to ask more, but she felt shy and unsure. She didn't know how to say the thing she was feeling. Carl looked at her carefully, as if he could read her thoughts. "Millie," he said quietly, "you have become more than a student to me." Millie's cheeks flushed. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound calm. Carl stood up and walked closer to her, but kept a respectful distance. "I mean," he said, "that I don't want you to leave. Not ever. You are not just someone I protect anymore." Millie felt her heart jump. Her eyes filled with emotion, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at him with a new confidence. "I don't want to leave either," she said. Carl nodded slowly, and for the first time, his face softened into something like a smile. In the quiet of the mountain night, their silence said more than words ever could. The next morning, Millie woke to the sound of distant shouting. Her heart jumped as she realized the village was close. Carl grabbed his staff and motioned for her to stay hidden behind a snowdrift. Millie's hands shook, but she obeyed. She could hear voices carrying through the cold air, men calling her name, and someone else shouting, "She's in the mountains! She's with the mountain man!" Carl's face grew tense. "They're coming," he whispered, "and they're not coming for peace." Millie felt a wave of fear wash over her. She thought of her Aunt Leora and the way she had betrayed her. She thought of the village's cruelty, but she also felt something else, a strong determination that burned inside her. Carl leaned closer and spoke quietly. "You need to be ready. If they find you, they will use you to punish me, and if they catch me, they will never stop." Millie swallowed hard. "What do we do?" she asked. Carl looked at her with serious eyes. "We do what the mountain teaches," he said. "We stay hidden, we stay silent, and we survive. But if they attack, we will fight." Millie nodded, her fear turning into courage. She realized that the mountain had not only taught her survival, it had taught her how to stand up for herself. As the villagers drew closer, Millie saw a figure stepping ahead of the group. It was her Aunt Leora, holding a lantern, her face hard and angry. Millie's breath caught in her throat. Leora's eyes locked onto her, and Millie felt the weight of betrayal like a stone in her chest. Leora raised her lantern high. "Millie," she called, voice cold, "come down and surrender. The village demands it." Millie stood up slowly, and for the first time she felt the mountain's power inside her. She looked at Carl, and he nodded once, quietly, with trust. Millie stepped forward, ready to face the woman who had destroyed her life. Millie stepped forward slowly, her boots crunching softly in the snow. The villagers froze for a moment, shocked to see her standing so calmly. Leora's eyes narrowed and her mouth curled into a cruel smile. "You think you can hide forever?" Leora sneered. "You belong to the village. You belong to me." Millie's voice was steady, even though her heart was pounding. "You don't own me," she said. "You never did." Leora's face twisted with anger. "Then you will pay," she hissed. She lifted her lantern higher, as if the light itself could force Millie to bow. Carl stepped out from behind Millie, standing tall and strong. His presence made the villagers step back, as if the mountain itself had moved. "She is not yours," Carl said, voice low and firm, "and you will not harm her." Leora laughed bitterly. "You think you can stop us? You're just a man who lives in the snow." Carl's eyes flashed. He raised his staff and struck the ground. The sound echoed through the mountains like thunder. The snow around them shook, and the villagers stumbled back in surprise. For a moment, the mountain felt alive, like it was responding to Carl's anger. Millie felt a strange power in the air. She realized Carl wasn't only strong, he was connected to the mountain in a way she didn't understand. The villagers looked afraid, and for the first time, Millie saw them as weak. Leora stepped closer, anger burning in her eyes. "You will regret this," she said, voice trembling. "The village will hunt you down." Millie lifted her chin. "Let them," she said, "because I am not afraid anymore." Carl placed a protective hand on Millie's shoulder, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. The mountain wind blew around them, and Millie felt like she had finally found where she belonged. The villagers hesitated, unsure what to do next. They were angry, but the fear in their eyes was louder than their hatred. Leora's face twisted with frustration as she watched Carl's staff still glowing faintly from the impact on the ground. Then a voice broke the silence. "Leora," said a man from the crowd, Elder Brahm, the village's oldest leader. His voice was calm but firm. "This is not the way. We can't fight the mountain. We will lose." Leora turned toward him furious. "You coward," she snapped. "We cannot let her live. She is the reason our children died." Millie stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "You blamed my mother for the fever, but you refused her help," she said. "You used me as a scapegoat because you were afraid of the truth." The villagers murmured, unsure. Some lowered their torches slightly, while others clenched their fists. Millie's words were like a stone thrown into still water. The ripples were spreading. Carl looked at Millie with pride, but also with worry. He knew the village could still turn violent. "Millie," he whispered, "now is not the time to fight with words. It's time to move." Millie nodded and turned to Carl. "What do we do?" Carl looked toward the forest path. "We leave tonight." Millie glanced back at the villagers one last time. She saw some faces filled with regret, and others filled with hatred. Leora stared at her with pure rage. Millie took a deep breath. "If you ever want help," she said, "you know where to find me, but not as your prisoner, as your choice." Then Millie grabbed Carl's hand, and together they ran into the snow, disappearing into the storm as the villagers watched in silence. Some relieved, some angry, and some finally questioning their own cruelty. They ran through the forest without looking back. The snow stung Millie's face, and her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Carl moved like a shadow, leading her along hidden paths he knew by heart. The mountain wind howled, but somehow it felt like it was pushing them forward rather than stopping them. After what felt like hours, Carl finally slowed and stopped beside a frozen stream. He pressed his hand against Millie's cheek, checking her breathing. "You're doing well," he said softly, "but we can't keep running forever." Millie nodded, exhausted. She leaned against a tree, trying to catch her breath. "Where will we go?" she asked, voice shaky. Carl looked at the sky, then down at the ground. "There is a place," he said, where no one from the village will find us. It's hidden deep in the mountain, where even the old paths fade." Millie looked at him, confused. "How do you know that?" Carl's face turned serious. "Because I used to live there," he said, "before I became the mountain man." Millie's heart tightened. "You lived in the mountain before?" Carl nodded. "Yes, I was not always alone. I had a family once." Millie's eyes widened. "What happened?" Carl looked away, his jaw tight. "The village did what villages do," he said quietly. "They betrayed us. They called us monsters, and they took everything from me." Millie felt her chest tighten. She understood now. Carl's past was as painful as hers. She realized they were not just connected by the mountain, but by the same kind of betrayal. Then Carl took a deep breath. "We will reach the hidden valley by nightfall," he said, "and there you will be safe." Millie looked at him with new trust. "I want to believe you," she whispered. Carl stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Then believe," he said, "because I will never let them hurt you again." Millie felt her heart flutter. In the cold darkness, with the mountain around them, she felt something warm growing, something like hope. By nightfall, they reached a hidden valley, tucked between two steep cliffs, an untouched place where the snow was quieter and the air felt strangely warm. Carl led Millie to a small wooden cabin built into the rocks, hidden behind a wall of evergreens. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a soft light glowed inside, as if the mountain itself was welcoming them. Millie stepped inside slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. The cabin was simple but cozy. There were dried herbs hanging from the beams, a wooden table with carved symbols, and a bed made of thick furs. It felt like a place where someone had lived in peace for a long time. Carl closed the door behind them and looked at her. "This is my home," he said, "and now it is yours too." Millie's throat tightened. "But what if the villagers find us?" she asked. Carl walked to the window and looked out into the dark valley. "They won't," he said, "not here. This place is hidden by the mountain, and even if they try, the mountain will protect us." Millie turned to him, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. Carl stepped closer and took her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "You are not a burden. You are my reason." Millie's heart raced. She looked at him, feeling a warmth she had never felt before. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a mistake or a curse. She felt like she belonged. Outside, the wind sang through the trees. Inside, the fire crackled softly, and two souls who had been broken by betrayal began to heal together. Months passed, and the hidden valley slowly became a true home for Millie and Carl. The harsh winter melted into spring, and the mountain showed its gentler side. Green shoots pushed through the snow, and the air smelled of pine and fresh earth. Millie learned more about herbs and healing, using the knowledge her mother had left behind. Carl taught her the old ways of the mountain, how to listen to the wind, how to read the stars, and how to respect the silence. They lived quietly, but their peace was not empty. They grew stronger together. Millie's heart slowly healed from the pain of betrayal, and Carl's loneliness finally began to fade. They were no longer just two lost souls in the snow. They were a team, a family. One day, a traveler arrived at the cabin, an old man with a walking stick and tired eyes. He had been lost in the mountain and found the hidden valley by chance. Millie and Carl helped him, giving him food and warm clothes. The man looked at them with surprise and gratitude. "You two are the ones they talk about," he said, "the mountain healer and the mountain guardian." Millie smiled softly. "We are just people," she said. The man nodded. "But your story is changing the village," he said. "They are starting to speak your name with respect instead of fear." That night, Millie and Carl sat outside the cabin watching the stars. Millie leaned her head on Carl's shoulder, feeling safe for the first time in her life. "Do you think the village will ever forgive us?" Millie asked quietly. Carl wrapped his arm around her. "Maybe not," he said, "but we don't need their forgiveness to live." Millie looked up at the mountain peaks glowing in the moonlight. "Then we will build our own world," she whispered. Carl smiled, and for the first time his eyes looked peaceful. "Yes," he said, "our own world." As the wind moved through the trees, Millie felt a calm she had never known before. The mountain had taken her from a life of lies and betrayal, but it had given her something far greater, a new beginning and a love that was real.